Should we go? Is this just, we just have a picture of that, right? That's not a video of Scott Walker's Venn diagram.
Yeah, it's just a picture.
Scott Walker, this guy is just a horrible human being. He just signed I can't even make sense of what this Venn diagram is supposed to be. Now, Scott Walker just signed the law that was passed by the Wisconsin Assembly and Senate that essentially, and North Carolina had done this before, Republicans, they're just incredibly anti-democratic. And I mean, there's really no other way to put that. And, I was starting to think about the debate I had with Adam Kokesh, who was a perfectly nice guy, and he was upset. I watched one of his follow-up videos, and it was okay. I mean, it wasn't it wasn't terribly dramatic, but he was really upset that I didn't have any first order ethics that shape my perspective on what government should function as. And apparently the idea that government should provide as much benefit as possible to as many people as possible was not sufficient for him. I mean, I think it's sort of like a religious fundamentalist saying, like, okay, well, that doesn't count because it doesn't mention like your perspective on first order doesn't count because it doesn't mention God. Like, well, okay, but I don't believe in God, and so I mean, I'm just using an analogy there. But the libertarian ethos, this notion of freedom and, the non-aggression principle really doesn't in any way, the words democracy, small d democracy, never come up in what libertarians talk about. And at the end of the day, if you go down some of those roads, and I've rarely gone down those roads, and I know we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic, and this, I get it. But theoretically, when we talk about American values, democracy is supposedly one of them. I mean, certainly we have killed a lot of people around the world in an effort to make them more democratic.
And as far as things we celebrate historically, the expansion of democracy is one of those main things.
Ostensibly, it's one of the things that make us, super special.
Yeah. And the reason why I'm on the opposite end of the political spectrum from Adam Kokesh is I believe in more democracy over the economy as well as the political government.
And I think we all do here. Jamie goes even further down that road. But you can really see, like, a lot of times we're seeing all these like op-eds now where people are like, the Republicans don't really seem to care about democracy. And if it wasn't a hint that for decades they've been talking about how they want less people to vote, and for at least a couple of decades, not quite a full-on 2 decades, there has been an active campaign to disenfranchise voters, like an institutional campaign to do that. I think that came up in the early aughts. Like, we're going to impose a new set of voting restrictions. And I should say, conservatives, were doing this from, well, at one point, we don't even count our slaves as humans. We want some goodies if we count them, but we're not going to give them any rights. It's not really democracy. And after that, in the Jim Crow era, things like, a poll tax, things like literacy requirements to vote, those are all institutional anti-democratic mechanisms that disenfranchise not just black people, but also poor people, right? I mean, a poll tax, poor people of any and all races. And then you come up into the modern day where they start to have these voter IDs, and even if it's like, we won't accept college student IDs, we'll take your gun permit. That'll be fine. And if you want a driver's license, that's okay, but we don't have DMV offices in your neighborhood. Sorry about that. It's going to cost you another day or two's worth of work if you don't get fired to actually be registered to vote, never mind to actually vote. So there is a huge, deep, abiding anti-democratic sentiment within the conservative mind, within the libertarian mind, within the Republican Party. And Scott Walker embodies all of that. It embraces all of that. We saw it in 2011 when he attacked public sector unions there and the healthcare, despite the fact that nobody wanted him to do so. They didn't vote for him to do that. We see it amongst the Republican Party in Michigan when they applied and they, even though there was a referendum against the emergency manager law, they overrode it and brought you Flint, the disaster that was Flint, as a function of that. In North Carolina, we saw the same thing when the Democratic governor was elected. The Republican House and Senate in the lame duck session stripped away prior authority that Democratic governor had and other institutions to increase democracy. And here is Scott Walker has just signed a bill doing the same thing, and then comes up with what purports to be a Venn diagram. And for the life of me, I can't understand what it is. Now, none of the powers that he lists, appointment authority, administrative rules authority, budget authority, veto authority, line item veto authority, executive order authority, I don't think he knows what a Venn diagram is. A Venn diagram is supposed to be, here is a set of attributes, and where, that are in group A and group B, and a Venn diagram merges those so that the ones that are within the sort of, what do you call that shape? Like an
overlap?
Like an oval, I guess oval.
The oval.
Sharp-edged oval. Those are where there's overlap. Those are powers that are in both camps. And I can't even make head nor tail of what he's done here, which is probably effective, because essentially what it does, it strips the Evers administration of a huge amount of authority in terms of redistricting and in terms of appointing people and in terms of the budget. It's really horribly anti-democratic, small d. And it's disgusting. And I mean, one would imagine, and they're set up, these anti-democratic measures are set up to retain power. And until Democrats fully grasp this, that's what the Republicans do, and begin to emulate it, not in shrinking democracy, but in edifying democracy. So good for the Democrats, and I hope they follow through on this, in announcing when they take over that they're going to pass various forms of voting rights, federal voting rights. They should go further. They should reestablish the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. I mean, on and on and on. But they need to go further with this, and obviously the Senate has to follow up if they get the Senate back, with things like card check, allowing for more democracy in the context of giving people the opportunity. Don't put up false roadblocks in people's opportunity to unionize. Give more protections for voters. Create a motor voter registration as a federal law. That is, one of the things. But these things which will both edify Democrats, but all you need to do for Democrats to edify their power is to expand democracy, because we see this time and time again. We just went through a midterm election where there was 10 million, 11 million more votes cast for Democrats than Republicans. Now, granted, you only saw that reflected in the House. You didn't see that reflected in the right way in terms of state houses in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Ohio, where you have intense gerrymandering, where Democrats win the majority of the seats and win the majority of the actual vote, and then get trounced when it comes to seats. In Wisconsin, I think they won 56% of the vote, and the numbers in the Senate and the House are something like 65 to 35% represented by Republicans to Democrats. I mean, anybody can tell that there's a problem there. And so if the Democrats regain some type of operational power, they must pursue a whole host of democratic, small d measures. Because A, that's an important value in a vacuum, but B, it also helps them retain power against anti-democratic forces. Here you have Ron DeSantis saying that Amendment 4, which calls for the reinstating of voting rights of 1.5 million ex-felons in Florida. And DeSantis, of course, needs to stop this from happening because he believes it's going to hurt him at the ballot box. And so he comes up with this idea that state lawmakers must approve an implementation bill that he signs, as opposed to just like, there's no implementation bill needed here. The executive can say, hey, all those people on your voter list, when you look them up and it says can't vote, ex-felon, just allow them to register. Period. End of story. That's all that needs to happen. He could do that. He has the executive authority to do that. He is slow walking this and hoping that something goes wrong. And it's incredibly undemocratic. Now, the Democrats have a new gerrymandering plan in New Jersey, and they're trying basically to gerrymander like the Republicans did.
But it's not quite the same, right? Like they're putting it up to a vote, and I think there's some major differences that Beauchamp misses in this.
They're putting it up. I should read into it more, but it's a problem regardless of who does it. But putting out, but having independent rewriting of districts, and all you need is to be Democratic, and Democrats will win. It's just there are more Democratic voters than Republican ones. That's just an undisputed fact. But
people who would vote for Democrats if they could vote.
And that's true too. But I can take, if I portion different parts of the country in such a way, then yes, I can come up with areas where there's more Republicans than not. But the reality is, if done in a fair way, and fair by being just 50-50 proportioning, Democrats are going to win the vast majority of elections.
Yeah, this is a first principle, right? People should be democratically represented in government, and just because expanding those rights gives you partisan advantage doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Right.
And the fact that any Democrats are either not doing anything about this issue or actively making it worse should say something about how not all Democrats are the same. Not all Democrats are good.
Yep.